Okay, well, I'm going to get started. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the first public workshop the Wildlife Conservation Board is hosting for the Lower American River Conservancy program. My name is Kara, and I manage the LARC program and will be guiding you through today's workshop. The focus of this workshop is to get folks acquainted with the program and WCB's competitive grant process and how to complete a competitive grant application. All of this is being provided to prepare you for our upcoming proposal solicitation notice that will be released on April 1st. And just so you know, this workshop is being recorded and will be posted to the program webpage in a few days. The workshop's agenda begins with an overview of the program, and then I'll review project requirements and the drivers of those requirements. We will then look at the 2021 grant process, which we call a PSN, or Proposal Solicitation Notice. I'll provide a few examples of current projects that are funded under the program, as well as hypothetical projects that would advance this year's PSN or the overall goals of the program. I'll offer some tips for writing a competitive proposal and then provide a couple slides on other funding programs at WCB that you should all consider when seeking funds for projects in the Parkway or elsewhere in the state. We will then wrap up with any follow-up questions and discussions. And as we go through each slide, you are free to ask questions before we move on. My only request is that you raise your virtual hand and wait to be called on, or you can post your question in the chat and we will do our best to address it before moving on to the next slide. Are there any questions so far? Okay, seeing none. Before jumping into the program overview, I want everybody to know right off the bat that the program guidelines plus the current year's PSN provide all the application and project requirements you need to know when submitting a project application. Both these documents can be found on the program webpage, which we will post a link to in the chat. So when in doubt, look to the program guidelines and the current PSN for guidance. My overview of the program is structured around the who, what, where, why, when, and how, and should provide a good understanding of the program and its fundamentals. We start with the why and the where of the program. So you might be wondering why the Lower American River Conservancy program was even created. And for those of you that are from the region, you might know that the Parkway is known as the crown jewel of Sacramento, because it provides many important resources for people and wildlife, including a 23-mile grain belt that follows the lower reach of the American River, and over 5,000 acres of contiguous open space, stretching from the west side of Sacramento County to its east side. And knowing the values that the Parkway brings to the region, Assemblymember Kevin McCarty authored a bill, Assembly Bill 1716, that was approved by the legislation in 2016, and that brought a state partner, which is WCB, to the Parkway to work with local agencies and nonprofits to improve and expand the natural, cultural, educational, and recreational resources of the Parkway. AB 1716 also created a fund in the state treasury specific for this program, so that the state can receive and expend money solely for the purposes of the Parkway. And AB 1716 put that responsibility of administering the program and its fund with the Wildlife Conservation Board. AB 1716 also defines the where of the program, or its geographic area of influence, which is the lower reach of the American River Parkway, from Hazel Avenue, where county land begins, downstream to the confluence with the Sacramento River at Discovery Park. The program can also be used to improve lands immediately adjacent to the Parkway. if those activities advance the resources of the parkway and the goals of the program. Here is a map of the program's geographic influence. And so on the right side of the map is Hazel Avenue, and just above Hazel Avenue is Lake Natoma and Nimbus Dam. And just below Hazel Avenue is the Nimbus Fish Hatchery. And so this entire purple shaded area includes the program's jurisdiction. And it passes through the town of Fair Oaks and Carmichael, through the city of Rancho Cordova, and continues through the city of Sacramento, all the way to where the American River terminates at the Sacramento River at Discovery Park. And again, any lands that are immediately adjacent to the parkway can be eligible to receive funds under the program, as long as that project advances the resources of the parkway and the goals of the program. The what of the program relates to what the program can fund or improve for the parkway, and that includes projects that expand or restore fish and wildlife habitat and other natural resources, projects that improve the quality of water that flows into and within the parkway, and projects that expand or enhance public access and recreation, as well as education and interpretation of the parkway's natural and cultural resources and history. The who of the program relates to who can apply for grant funds, and that includes local public agencies and nonprofit organizations. State and federal agencies, as well as tribes, are not eligible to receive grant funds, but this does not mean you cannot partner with these entities or seek matching funds from them to support a proposed project. You know what? I'll stop here and ask if there's any questions so far. Haven't seen any hands go up. Nothing in the chat. Okay. So the how of the program relates to how the goals of the program are advanced. And that is through 3 different project types or categories, which include planning projects, implementation projects, and land acquisitions. Well, one piece of advice for any one of these categories is to take a step back when developing your project and ask yourself if the project can benefit any other resources or goals of the parkway. For example, a trail reconstruction or stabilization project can look beyond the trail tread and shoulders and explore the possibility of enhancing habitat in the area or adding interpretive exhibits along the trail to teach users about the parkway's natural and cultural history. And for any planning project, it's important to demonstrate your long-term vision for seeing the planning project through to construction. So in the application, tell us what your plans are for implementing the project. For example, do you have funds secured for construction? If not, what funding sources are you going to seek? What type of crew might be implementing the project? And how do you see the site being used after construction, whether by people or wildlife? And how do you see the site being maintained over the long term? And even though these topics may be developed more during the planning process, it's still important to tell us these things in your application and what steps you are taking or thinking about when it comes to seeing the project through to construction. And lastly, a project cannot mingle in 2 categories. So a proposal either needs to be a planning project or an implementation project or a standalone land acquisition. It cannot be 2 of these project types. However, implementation projects, they can fund bringing 65% design plans to 100%, as well as paying for project permit fees, as long as the environmental review for that project has been completed. Are there any questions on the how slide? Okay. The final slide of the program overview is on the when and relates to when WCB receives proposals for projects. And that is through our proposal solicitation notice. The PSN provides all the detailed information on how to apply and what to expect. It tells you what the program priorities are for the year, how much money is available for projects, and what the funding source is. Important dates for application submission and the review process, if there are any specific project requirements, what each proposal will be evaluated, and what forms to use for the application and how to submit that application. In a little bit, I will be reviewing the PSN for this year's grant cycle, and we'll touch on some of the points listed here. We are now moving on to project requirements, which are very important to understand when developing a project. Project requirements are driven by three main sources, which include the program's requirements, which are taken directly from AB 1716, WCB policies, and also the funding source requirements. We'll first take a look at the program drivers. And the first one on this list you all heard about earlier, and that is a proposed project must be located within or adjacent to the Lower American River Parkway. Second, all proposed projects must be consistent with the 2008 American River Parkway Plan. And finally, the landowner must provide written consent that they approve the project on their land. This last requirement applies to implementation and planning projects. We typically do not need written consent from a landowner for a planning project, but AB 1716 says that in administering the program, WCB shall not fund or implement a project without the written consent of the landowner. So before we fund a planning project, we do need written consent from the landowner, and this can be provided in one of two ways. Either the landowner can sign the application for grant funds, or they can provide a written letter addressed to our executive director describing their support of the project and agreeing to the activities on their land if a grant agreement is executed. Any questions on the program drivers? Okay. Hearing and seeing none, we will go on to the WCB drivers, which are essentially our policies and are quite typical for many state funding programs, such as the applicant or grantee is responsible for obtaining all project permits. Implementation projects must have environmental review completed at least 15 days prior to board approval. So what this means is that Sequa, for example, does not need to be completed upon application submittal, but will need to be completed before we can present the project to our board for review and funding approval. Implementation projects and land acquisitions must be maintained for 25 years. And to ensure that the grantee and WCB are on the same page about what this means, when developing the grant agreement, we include a management plan as an exhibit of the final agreement. And this exhibit is typically 1 to 2 pages long and broadly describes the management and maintenance activities over the next 25 years that will protect the state's investment at the site and uphold the purposes of the grant. If there is an existing management plan that describes how this site and any improvements will be maintained over the 25-year period, we can reference that document in the management plan exhibit. As for the budget, the only hard requirement we have is on the admin costs, or what some might refer to as overhead or indirect costs. And we cap admin costs at 20% of the WCB award minus subcontractor and equipment costs. So what this means is that when calculating the admin costs for the project, you cannot exceed 20% of the personnel time, travel, supplies, and any fees such as permits. and can include this amount as an individual line item in the budget. If you do plan on recovering your administrative costs, you must explain the methodology used to determine the rate and provide detailed calculations in support of the indirect rate that is used. This is noted in the budget worksheets of the application form. And if there's any confusion about this, you are welcome to call me at any point to seek clarification. And lastly, the WCB logo must be included on any publications, signs, media, and presentations that are produced for the project. For most implementation projects and land acquisitions, we do require that a sign be installed on site that acknowledges the project partners. And while we are on the topic of signs, although this is not a requirement, I do want to mention that WCB does encourage the production of multilingual interpretive panels. This is something our board has been asking for and likes to see for any interpretive educational materials that are produced as part of the project. Okay, any hands or questions?
Kara, we have one question in the chat.
Oh, okay. Do you want to go ahead and read it off?
Yes. Can Sequa be a part of the planning grant?
Yes, it can be, and is definitely a task of most of our planning grants. And so one thing to keep in mind is that, you know, our grants are typically 3 years long, and so we would expect that the environmental review can be completed within that time frame.
And then, Kara, we just had another one pop up.
Okay.
We can ask admin cost questions at any time. Does that mean even after the PSN is released?
Yes. Yes, most definitely. That's more of a policy topic for WCV, and so it really does not affect the competitive nature of the proposal, and so that's something that I can talk about at any point. Okay, let's see. So now on to the funding source drivers for certain project requirements. The only source of funding for the program at this time is Proposition 68. So the following requirements are taken directly from that bond measure, such as a 20% cost share is required for any project that does not benefit a disadvantaged community. This requirement is waived when the applicant can demonstrate that the project is within a disadvantaged community or within 1 mile of a disadvantaged community. There is a handy interactive map provided by the Department of Water Resources that shows you where all disadvantaged communities are within the state. We provide a link to this site in the PSN, and we also post the link in the chat here today. If the project area falls outside a disadvantaged community, then you will be required to provide a 20% match. And this can be in the form of cash or in-kind services. And match does need to be secured before we can present the project to our board for funding approval. And if your project is within a disadvantaged community, we still encourage applicants to seek matching funds, as this will bolster your proposal and lead to extra points during evaluation and scoring. Prop 68 also requires that the funding logo be added to any publications or signs that the grant pays for. Both the WCB logo and Prop 68 logo can be found on our website, and the link will be provided in the chat as well, and can also be found in the PSN and the grant agreement document. And any questions on the project requirements or their drivers? Okay, so now on to what you all have been waiting for. the details of this year's PSN. So the priorities for this year include projects that improve the quality of water within the parkway and projects that improve fish and wildlife habitat and other natural resources. Implementation projects and land acquisitions will also be prioritized, as well as projects located in the Woodlake and Cal Expo plan areas. I will mention that just because, if your project does not hit any of these priority areas, I would still encourage you to submit your application. So these are just priorities that will get you more points during the evaluation process. But if your project does not hit any of these areas, your project won't be considered ineligible. And we have up to $2 million to spend this year, and we'll likely have another $2 to $2.5 million to spend next year. Grant requests should be no less than $100,000, and of course, the minimum grant, or the maximum grant request should not exceed $2 million. Any questions on the priorities or funds that are available for this year's PSN?
Here we have one hand raised.
Okay.
From an Alex Watson.
Okay, Alex, if you want to go ahead and ask your question. Is Alex on mute, maybe?
Yeah, he was. Sorry. If the project aims to target a disadvantaged community but does not take place within one of those areas, does that meet the requirement? Or, for example, if aiming to do a recreation program for disadvantaged youth in the South Sacramento area, taking place in Riverbend Park, would that meet those requirements? Or
we have, so there is a project category type that's related to Prop 68 that's called a community access project. And it sounds like what you're describing is more of, the grant funds would be used to develop that program. Am I correct?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. And that program would bring youth from disadvantaged communities to the parkway to for outdoor educational opportunities.
Outdoor, educational and recreational activities. Yeah.
Yeah, I think in your application, you can demonstrate how that project would be directly benefiting a disadvantaged community. And so just, making that clear connection would be the, what you would need to do to really demonstrate that and be able to check that box.
Thank you very much.
Okay, any other hands or questions? Okay. So let's see, when preparing and submitting your application, you must use the current year's application form and associated worksheets for the budget. All forms will be available on the program's webpage when we release the PSN. There are instructions for each form that can be found on the first page of the document or the first worksheet of the Excel file for the budget worksheets. The application forms must be submitted in specific file formats, including a Word document for the application form, an Excel file for the budget spreadsheets, and pictures should be provided as a JPEG, PNG, or PDF file. And any spatial information, such as a project boundary, should be provided as a KMZ or KML file. The PSN does provide links to helpful resources on how to create a KMZ or KML file through Google Earth. We will also accept ArcMap shapefiles if that software is available to you. Application documents will be accepted one of two ways. We prefer that you upload them to a secure FTP site that is hosted by the Department of Fish and Wildlife. All you need to do is email me requesting a link and password, and I can get you access to the site by the end of the day. It is advised that you request the link no later than 1 day before the application due date. Also, the link stays active for 14 days, so you can request it before you're ready to start uploading documents. We will also accept applications by ground mail if postmarked no later than 5 p.m. on the application due date. Any questions about the submission requirements?
We have one question in the chat, Kara.
Okay.
Can a consultant upload an application for a public agency client?
Yes. Okay. I'm going to review the PSN process now. So on the far left side, you can see that we kick off the PSN with a consultation period that is open for about 2 weeks. We do advertise this on our website and through our mailing list. And during the consultation period, applicants may call me and ask any questions and discuss their project concept. The solicitation box represents the release of the PSN and submittal of the application. Once we release the PSN, I cannot talk to applicants about their projects or provide guidance on developing a project. All I can do is answer basic questions about the process, our policies, or the application forms. So if you want to pick my brain about your project idea or how to make it more competitive, definitely take advantage of the consultation period. And following the close of the application period, WCB staff will do an administrative review of each proposal, making sure that the applicant is an eligible entity, the proposal represents an eligible project type, all application documents are complete and submitted in the required formats, and every question has been answered. Following the admin review is a technical review, which is based on predefined criteria that evaluate specific aspects of a project and the proposal. The evaluation criteria is provided in the PSN as Appendix A, which I strongly encourage everybody to take a look at so that you know what your project is being scored on. Applications that score 75 or higher will then advance to the advisory committee, who recommends which projects to fund. Some folks might be familiar with the advisory committee of the program, but for those of you who are not familiar, AB 1716 mandated that WCB convene an advisory committee that is made up of representatives from the County Board of Supervisors, the City of Sacramento, City of Rancho Cordova, and the state, and members of the public that are appointed by the Governor, Senate, and the Assembly. The main purposes of this committee is to advise WCB on the needs and priorities of the Parkway and to recommend which projects we bring to our board for final funding approval. Proposals recommended by the advisory committee for funding will then be sent to the county for regional parks to determine if the project is consistent with the American River Parkway Plan. Projects that are consistent will then be presented to the voting members of WCB for review and final approval. About 10 to 8 weeks leading up to the board meeting, which is about this yellow arrow here between Sacramento County review and WCB review and approval, is when WCB staff will prepare the grant agreement with the applicant and prepare all materials for the board meeting. This is a critical time for staff and developing the grant agreement, so it's really important for the applicant to be available to answer questions and review draft grant documents. We also must have a signed grant agreement from the grantee prior to the board meeting. for the project to keep its place on the agenda. So another reason that it's really important for the applicant to be available in those weeks leading up to the WCB board meeting. And now that we are in the days of DocuSign, we can turn around a fully executed grant agreement a few days after the board meeting, which grantees are very pleased with because they can almost start immediately following board approval. However, you must wait to receive a fully executed grant agreement and its notice to proceed before you can start charging time and materials to the grant. Any questions on the proposal process?
We have one question in the chat.
Okay.
What are the consultation period dates?
So the next slide covers that, but I will mention that the consultation period starts tomorrow and goes through the end of the month, so March 31st. Are there any other questions on the process? Okay, so here is the timeline for this year's PSN. So the consultation period starts tomorrow and will go through the end of the month. And then on April 1st, we will release the PSN. Applications will be due by 5 p.m. on May 14th. And then during the summer is when we will do the admin and technical reviews. And proposals that score well will then be presented to the advisory committee on September 1st for recommendation. And the advisory committee meetings, they are public meetings as well. And you can find our announcements for those meetings on our webpage, on the LARC webpage, as well as the WCB main page. Sacramento County will likely do their consistency determination at their October meeting. And then WCB staff will be able to start bringing projects to our board for review and approval starting in November. And our board meets quarterly. So if a proposal for some reason is not ready for the November meeting, then the next board meeting would be in February 2022. And we hope to have all recommended proposals to our board for review and approval by the May 2022 meeting. Projects must be completed and funds expended by March 31st, 2025, which is about a 3-year grant term, plus a few months for those projects that go to the November board meeting. Any questions on the timeline?
We have one question in the chat.
Okay.
Is it okay to lobby advisory committee members?
We do ask for letters of support. So if you want to, introduce your project idea to one of the board of supervisors that, I would think is the supervisor for the district that the project is within, then, that's definitely something that we would like to see and have as a letter of support from them. But lobbying, I guess, I think I would be more comfortable with just gaining support from the advisory committee members and then expressing that support through the, just a letter of support that's submitted along with your application.
And we have one more question.
Okay.
Will next year's timeline be similar?
Ooh, I have not thought that far, but I know that we are waiting for the Natural Resources Management Plan to be approved and certified by the county. And I know that that's something that we're expecting to happen by the end of this year. And so I can see, having a similar timeline or maybe a little earlier timeline for next year. But I think, so we've had a proposal solicitation notice, oh gosh, every year since 2018. And it's been about this same timeline. So, releasing the PSN in spring and then bringing the proposals to the advisory committee sometime in the late summer, early fall. Okay. And if there's no other questions, that wraps it up for the details of this year's PSN. So knowing that, are there any other questions anybody has? Okay, so I'm going to move on now to a few project examples. So listed here are some funded projects and hypothetical projects. And in the parentheses next to the name of the funded project are the program goals that project is advancing. And some projects advance a few goals of the program, and in time we'll be providing multiple benefits to the Parkway, which is something we definitely like to see with any project proposal, but this is not a requirement. But of course, it needs to hit at least one of the goals of the program. Some hypothetical projects may include active habitat restoration at Bushy Lake or Cordova Creek once the planning for those projects is completed. Trail construction and habitat restoration at the Sutter's Landing acquisition site, which could be a planning project for those improvements. And improvements to stormwater capture and treatment facilities that would improve the quality of water that enters the Parkway. And there are many more hypothetical projects that can advance this year's priorities. And a good starting point would be to reach out to regional parks for their input, or some of the other Parkway partners. Let's see. On the next few slides, I provide some tips for writing complete and competitive proposals. We start with important reading materials. And so the documents listed here provide really important information that can help you tell the story of your project and why it's important. For example, the PSN includes the criteria that we will be evaluating each proposal on. And by acquainting yourself with these criteria, you can get an idea of the strengths of your project and areas that might need to be more developed and addressed in your proposal. The Parkway Plan can provide good background information on your project site and help you understand if your project is consistent with the Parkway Plan, as well as advancing a goal or objective for a particular area plan or even the greater Parkway. The implementation section of the Parkway Plan can also help you know what to expect when working with the county on a project in the Parkway. And finally, please read the application and budget worksheet instructions so that you know what to submit to make your application complete. And if you have any questions about these documents or where you can find specific information on a topic, please do not hesitate to pick up the phone and give me a call, or shoot me an email if that's easier for you. Let's see, moving on. So when writing your proposal, you need to connect the dots for us. Imagine that your audience who is evaluating your project has never heard of or been to the Parkway. Your job is to clearly describe how your project will advance the resources of the Parkway, as well as the priorities of the PSN or the program goals, and what that means for the Parkway. Projects are usually scoped around a problem that needs to be fixed. So tell us what that problem is, how the project is going to fix it, and what the outcomes will be. Also, if your project is addressing initiatives or objectives from a regional or state plan, tell us that and be specific. Don't just reference the plan and make the reviewers figure out how your project aligns with that plan. When scoping your project and developing its timeline and budget, make sure you account for all the project requirements. For example, you might need to give yourself more time between finishing 100% design plans and starting construction because the county's Recreation and Parks Commission needs to review and approve 100% designs before you can start breaking ground, which is something you can learn more about in the implementation section of the Parkway Plan. You should also ask yourself what permits your project may need and budget for those permit fees and the time needed to apply for them. And finally, make sure all the information connects. So the objectives should relate to the goals and the budget should account for all the proposed work, whether it is part of the grant request or being covered by matching funds. Okay, and lastly, tell us your story. Tell us who the project team is, why the project is needed, what the goals and objectives are and the scope of work, where the project is located and information about the site, when will activities take place, as well as certain milestones, and how you plan to carry out the project, such as your methods, materials, or plans that you are following. Any questions on tips for writing competitive proposals?
We have a couple questions in the chat.
Okay.
The first one is more about the timeline. Does the grantee need to be available for the full 6 months, November 21st to May 22nd? Oh, November 2021 to May 2022.
Not necessarily. I mean, you'll know in advance the board meeting that we're going to bring your the project to. So I would say by October, you will, all be reaching out to the applicants whose proposals were recommended by the advisory committee and talking with them about how ready they are to move forward in developing a grant agreement and starting on their project. And so, if somebody's not yet ready, let's say because Sequa hasn't been completed yet, then we would, maybe push that project from the November board meeting out to the February one.
Our second question is, how much weight will be given to proposals that meet this year's priority areas versus those that don't focus specifically on fish and wildlife habitat or water quality?
Ooh, that's a good question. And you know what? I will, let's put a hold on that one. I actually, after the presentation, I can go ahead and pull up the evaluation criteria. And you know what, let me see actually if I can take a quick look right now. And find that.
Kara, this is Rebecca, and I would just add quickly on this. It really just depends on how many proposals are received and how much money is being requested. I mean, it is clear that there will be priority to what we're highlighting in the PSN, but it kind of depends on what the realm of the applications we receive look like overall and our availability of funding for those.
Yeah, and when it comes to the specific evaluation criteria, each criterion is weighted differently, and so that's what I was going to look up. And after when we get through the presentation, we can definitely go there and take a look at how the priorities are weighted relative to the other criterion. And so I think that was the question. But if it wasn't, please chime in and help us understand more what you were asking. Were there any other questions, Alexa?
Not at this time.
Okay. Okay, so I'm going to wrap up by putting a plug in for our other programs. So if you didn't know, we have 14 different funding programs at WCB, and 10 of them can be used to help fund projects in the Parkway. Listed here are those 10 programs, and the ones with parentheses below them provide the time frame for that program's next PSN and approximately how much money will be available for projects. 3 programs have PSNs coming this summer and have a pretty good chunk of money available. The riparian habitat conservation program is unique in that it is not our traditional competitive grant program, but it is what we call a continuous grant program, and we typically receive concepts all year long. However, we are sitting on a large amount of riparian dollars, and so in January, we released a call for concepts to spark interest in the program and to nudge folks to send us their riparian habitat concepts. And what the March date represents is when pre-applications are due, which is by March 31st. So there is time if anyone is interested in submitting a pre-app under the riparian program. The pre-application form is really short and sweet. And if you have a good project already developed, then it shouldn't take you more than an hour or two, I would say, to sit down and complete that application form. You can find the call for concepts flyer for the riparian program on our main page under announcements. And we will also post a link to the riparian webpage in the chat where the flyer is also posted. And I am the manager of the riparian program and would be happy to talk to anybody about the call for concepts and your riparian project ideas. And we do have a web page for each of our programs where you can find more information about the focus of that program and contact information for the program manager. Any questions on these WCB programs? Okay, and this slide lists the other 4 programs at WCB that are less likely to fund projects in the Parkway because of their specific geographic region or maybe certain land use types that are not present in the Parkway. But it is good to know about these programs in case any of you are seeking funds for projects outside the Parkway. And that does it for the presentation. So I'd like to thank everybody for joining us today and for your interest in the Lower American River Conservancy program, as well as helping us and the county and all the partners and stakeholders, make the Parkway a better place for us all. So thank you for your time today and joining us. And if there are any other questions or people want to discuss anything, we've set aside until 3. So we have plenty of time to answer any questions. And something I will do, as promised, is look up that evaluation criteria. So let's see here. I'm going to pull that up. Oh, not that one. Here we go. This is the PSN document that will be coming out soon. And so as you can see here, the evaluation criteria, this first one that I'm highlighting, hopefully everybody can see that. The weight factor for this criterion is 4, which is much higher than some of the other ones that are, hover around 2, half a point to 2 points. So, and this really, our technical reviewers, they have the discretion to really rank this criterion as they see appropriate for the project. So if your project is advancing more than one priority, you might get, the max amount of points, 5. But if you're only advancing 1, maybe they'll give you 1 point or 2. So the more priorities you can hit on, the better. But again, that's not a an absolute requirement for an eligible project or an eligible proposal under this PSN. Okay, are there any other questions or discussion points?
One question has come in.
Okay.
Is Sequa required for all grants?
So for an implementation grant, yes. Sequa does need to be done 15 days prior to our board meeting. For planning projects, you know, we expect that that's going to be a task of a planning project. However, most planning projects do, you know, include Sequa, and is something that we would like to see part of the planning project, just so that we know it's going to be shovel ready in the next phase. And I will also mention that although WCB is a you know, a state agency and could be a Sequa lead, we do not take on that role. You know, if a project is going to need anything higher than a categorical exemption. So we, you know, as when we approve projects for funding, when we approve state dollars, that is, you know, an action we're taking. And so we do file a notice of exemption or a notice of determination if a project already has an environmental document. But we will not be the Sequa lead agency for a project that needs a mitigated negative declaration or an environmental impact report.
We've had a couple more questions come in.
Okay.
The first is, would it be possible to view the PSN during the consultation period so we can factor it in proposal requirements into project design?
No, that would be giving you an advantage to everybody else. You know, if you have specific questions that would help you develop your project prior to the release of the PSN, you're more than welcome to ask me. So, you know, during the consultation period, you know, just hit me with all the questions you might have to help you develop your project more. And you can have, you know, you can call me every day during the consultation period if you want. It doesn't need to be, you know, one sit down session consultation period. And you could, you know, email me or call me. I've found that usually the phone calls, there's a lot more dialogue that goes back and forth and you get more information out of me. So I would recommend just giving me a call.
Okay, the next question is, does Sequa need to be done prior to the WCB meeting in November of 2021, or would we be okay as long as it is done by May 2022?
I'm sorry, I know it's a Sequa question. Repeat that again.
Does Sequa need to be done prior to the WCB meeting in November 2021, or would we be okay as long as it is done by May 2022?
So Sequa needs to be completed prior to whatever board meeting we're bringing your project to. So if, you know, if a proposed project doesn't plan on having Sequa done until, let's say, March of 2022, well, then, yeah, the next board meeting that would we would be able to bring that proposal to our board would be at the May meeting.
Okay, the next question is, if we are granted a planning grant, which is completed, is an implementation grant assured?
Not necessarily. You know, we right now, how the program's funded, you know, we have $2 million available this year, up to $2.5 million available for our next grant cycle. And so, you know, there's a chance that maybe the funds could be exhausted by that time, but it does not. No, us funding a planning project does not guarantee that we will be part of the implementation funding. However, of course, we would like to be part of it since we invested in the planning project, but there's no guarantees.
No other questions have come in yet, Kara.
Okay, thank you, Alexa. Really appreciate you doing that doing that work of managing the chat room and the hands.
You're welcome.
Okay.
We had one more come in.
Okay.
Is a pre-application required for this?
No pre-applications are part of this year's process. I just wanted to pull up this last slide here in case any of you are wondering what my email address is or cell number, which is the number provided here. And again, this workshop will be posted on the LARC webpage, I hope by the end of the week. So if you need to reference it or share it with your partners, feel free to come back to the webpage at the end of the week or next week, and hopefully you'll find it there. If not, I can always share the PowerPoint with you directly as a PDF. Okay, well, seems pretty quiet. If there's no other questions, again, thank you everybody for joining us today. And my door's always open, so feel free to give me a call, shoot me an email, and I'd love to talk about your project ideas for the Parkway and the program. And with that, I will call it a done deal for the workshop. This workshop is complete.
Thank you, Kara.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.